you probably felt differently somewhere in the middle of that fight than you did in any other Tyson fight that led up to that point. And again, that night might be the night that many people who cover boxing will say that was kind of the beginning of a different time for boxing because, as we said, Lennox Lewis, a great heavyweight champion, but didn't carry the same star power that Mike Tyson did. And Klitschko's a great champion, but certainly doesn't carry the same star power. So when Mike Tyson went down that night, did heavyweight boxing go down with it? And I'm excited to talk to Al Bernstein, the Hall of Fame Showtime analyst, and he joins us now here on 97.3 ESPN. I can't believe 25 years ago, Mike Tyson was laying on the canvas, Al. It seems like it was not just yesterday, but I can't believe it was 25 years ago, and how the game has changed since that night.
Yeah, no, that was a while ago, that's for sure. And yeah, his loss, of course, at that moment, in terms of the heavyweight division, in any case, certainly changed things. Although there were still many important days in the heavyweight division to come with Lewis, with Holyfield. There was still the Tyson Holyfield fight to come, which was a pretty extraordinary event as well. But yeah, it was an extraordinary night because no one expected Buster Douglas to win that fight. You know, Douglas was considered kind of an underachiever in boxing. Everyone knew he had great potential, but at 29 years of age, hadn't really shown it. And came into the fight with a couple of good wins over Oliver McCall and Trevor Berbick, but there was not much foreshadowing of what was to come. Tyson, this was his 10th defense of his title. He had just knocked out Carl Williams in one round. In fact, I think that fight might have been in Atlantic City.
Yeah.
And had knocked out Michael Spinks also in Atlantic City in one round, and just was dominating everyone. So the fact that this was such an extraordinary surprise was amazing.
Al Bernstein with us. You know, do you remember what led to these two guys and fighting in Tokyo? You know, what made it be over there? What made these two guys get in the ring together?
Well, Douglas, he had run through a lot of the heavyweight contenders at that point. You know, this was defense number 10. Douglas had won 2 matches that I mentioned, beating Trevor Berbick, who Tyson won the title from, and then beating Oliver McCall, who was the top contender. So it was yet another person that they could put in with Tyson. And the fight ended up in Japan just because there was not a great hue and cry here, but it was a good location for Don King and his promotion company to put it in, and they drew a big crowd, and it was, and also Don King had been around during the Ali years when Ali went elsewhere to defend his title, and he saw it as a way to internationalize and globalize the heavyweight championship again. Little did they know it was going to end up as it did.
42-1 favorite, as many people think. It's maybe one of the biggest upsets in sports. When you go back to that day or that night and then the days afterwards, how surprised were people was it almost like, I can't believe what I just saw? I mean, was it on the level in boxing of, I can't understand how Mike Tyson lost this fight? Or were there some people that understood that he just was disinterested, it looked like, that night?
Well, no one thought going in. It wasn't like the Holyfield-Tyson fight where there were a few people who picked Holyfield to win. Ron Borges was one, a well-known writer. In this fight, literally no one thought Buster Douglas could win this fight, based on his previous performances for the most part, and the fact that now people say in hindsight, there were signs that Tyson, well, where were the signs? He knocked out Carl Williams in one round. He knocked out Spinks in one round. He had knocked out Holmes before that and a bunch of other fighters. Now, Holmes was, of course, older and later in his career, but there were no serious signs up. Kevin Rooney had moved on as his trainer, and he had a different corner group, but you couldn't really point to any of that and say, gee, he was he was primed for an upset. So I think almost no one really thought that this was feasible. And while we all knew that inside Buster Douglas somewhere was a great fighter, we didn't know it would come out. And also, part of this was fueled by some extraordinary events involving Douglas. His mother had passed away 23 days earlier, who he was very close to. The mother of his child was fighting a serious illness that they had just diagnosed. And so there was all this inner turmoil going on in him, and he took that and channeled it. into finally fighting the fight of his life and showing the mental toughness that people weren't sure he had. And he needed every bit of that, because not only did he have to fight better, but when he was knocked down and later in the fight, in round 9, I believe, was either 8 or 9, he had to get up and then continue on in the fight. So there was a lot at play here, like always in great moments from sporting events, and in this case, one of the greatest upsets in any sport, and probably the greatest in boxing. There's always these intangibles that you have to weigh in on.
Al Bernstein's with us, the Hall of Fame Showtime analyst, talking about 25 years ago. Mike Tyson was knocked out by James Buster Douglas. And, you know, I mentioned right before you came on, Al, that maybe the heavyweight division, that was the night that things changed for that, because Lewis was a great champion, didn't have the same star power. Klitschko now, same thing. Do you kind of look at it the same way, that once Tyson went down, that boxing at that division has never been able to really rebound?
Well, I don't know, because there were big moments after that. You know, the Lewis Holyfield fight in Madison Square Garden. You know, the 2 fights they had, the Holyfield Tyson. Clearly, since about 2000 or so, you know, things have changed. Boxing's become more of a niche sport in general, and the heavyweight division clearly has not, in the United States, hasn't had that. But remember, the Klitschkos put 50,000 people in soccer stadiums and draw pay-per-view numbers and live numbers in the millions in Europe. So from a purely jingoistic standpoint in America, perhaps the heavyweight division is less, but not worldwide.
You know, a lot of people go back to that fight and talk about the count in that night from the referee, and many people think Tyson actually won that fight, that he knocked out Douglas. What's your take on that? And obviously, there's a lot of video out there. What do you say about that instance in the fight?
It's possible the count went a little bit long. I don't know. There is certainly enough to hang your hat on to say that they should have disqualified or given the nod to Tyson, and then Don King, the promoter of Tyson, fueled the flames on this after the fight to try and get the decision overturned, which would have been, really an outrage in my mind. So I don't really think that was merited, the fight being turned around.
Al, obviously, after that, Tyson's life took a turn, and he basically, was just never the same guy in the ring. And he had a couple of wins afterwards, but nothing. He was very nondescript. But what happened to Douglas? I think that's something that, he just was it that, like you mentioned, the perfect storm for one night for him. What happened to him?
Well, there are two things. Tyson, of course, did get the heavyweight title back again. He went to jail over the conviction of rape. He fought a number of times. Then he was convicted of rape. Then he came out, won the heavyweight title again, and then lost it to Evander Holyfield. So there would be more drama for him afterwards. But for Buster Douglas, his very next fight, which is what I did on pay-per-view against Evander Holyfield, he signed a big contract with Steve Wynn, and the next fight was with Evander Holyfield, and Buster Douglas literally was ordering room service at 2 o'clock in the morning every night at the Wynn, came in way overweight, reverted back to his underachieving ways, and from that moment on was not the fighter he could have been. He had an extraordinary opportunity, because had Buster Douglas been able to channel what he did in the fight with Mike Tyson, he might very well have continued on. He was lucky in facing Holyfield, who wasn't a monstrous punching heavyweight, a very good, of course, great fighter, that he was fighting a man kind of his own size, and there were some similarities in their style, but Douglas did not take advantage of it at all, and instead, kind of faded into obscurity from that point, which is, another aspect of this story that's kind of sad.
It really is. And, as I mentioned, we haven't really had a great American heavyweight champion, not even a challenger. I mean, do you find that yes, Klitschko fills the buildings, and like I said, Lewis was a great champion, just didn't have the star power. Do you feel that division, I mean, is it going to be a while? Is it something that...
Deontay Wilder just 2 months ago won a version of the heavyweight title against Berman Stavern. Wilder was the bronze medalist in the Olympics for the United States. Not this last Olympics, but the one before it. And he's undefeated, and he just beat Berman Stavern in Las Vegas with a brilliant performance, and he has got a portion of the heavyweight title, and there's talk of him fighting Klitschko or Tyson Fury. So if we're looking for the next person to do this, he may have already arrived in Deontay Wilder, who's 6'6" and from Alabama, and has a larger-than-life personality, and his performance against Stavern was much better than I think anyone thought was possible. And so he's probably the man to watch to see if he would be the one to rekindle that interest in the heavyweight division.
That would be nice to see, as we all know that the heavyweights are very entertaining. But obviously, I'd like to get your take on where you believe, if ever, the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight stands at this day, because it seems like by the day things continue to change, but no closer to that fight ever happening, or are you optimistic?
Oh, no, I think they're very close. I think that, the negotiations have been going on here for the last couple of weeks, and I think it's within a grasp. Whether it happens or not, that's another issue, but I think the chances of it happening have gone up dramatically. And if they don't reach an agreement in the next week or two, then it clearly isn't going to happen in May, and it probably will never happen. But I actually believe that within the next 5 or 6, 7 days, the chances of it being made are infinitely better than the chances of it not being made.
That'd be awesome. And obviously, let me get your take on this then. Does it have the feel of when Tyson Holyfield fought, where it was kind of like, man, I wish I would have seen this? Or do you think that these two guys are still very close to the top of their game, and we are seeing a fight that everybody would hope to have seen maybe 5 years ago?
Well, oftentimes, clearly, they were better fighters 4 or 5 years ago, although Mayweather seems to have eroded a little bit less, although Pacquiao's looked very good in his last couple of fights. Sometimes, though, when fighters have eroded a little bit, what we get is a better fight. And that may be the case in this one. I don't know if it will be, but there's no question these two men are still at a point, and Mayweather at this juncture still has not lost and has performed extraordinarily well. And even Pacquiao in his loss to Marquez, most recent loss, he was coming back and winning that fight when he got clipped with that right hand. But so there's no question it's of interest to boxing fans. Will it be a great fight? You never know when you put two people in the ring. But I think there's a chance that it will be a compelling fight. And it's not as if we're seeing two men who are on the last legs of their skill set. They're both still very, very good fighters.
Al, obviously we here in Atlantic City, we missed the fight game. Now, we did have Hopkins fight here recently, and it was a great atmosphere. And, really since Gotti passed, there hasn't been much in terms of that building being full. Is this a viable boxing town anymore, or do you think that this place's time has passed as well?
Yeah, I think it has to be the right fight. I think certain fights, when the right fighters are involved and the promotional aspects of it are done correctly, there's no question there can still be important boxing in Atlantic City, and we've seen some evidence of it. But the kind of the forces have to converge the right way for it to happen. I don't think, in terms of the depth of boxing, the amount of shows that Atlantic City will ever see the number that it saw years and years ago.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the Tyson Spinks, that was a fight here. Carla Truth Williams, that here as well. I don't know that you're ever going to get one quite as big as that Tyson Spinks fight here in Atlantic City, which was maybe one of the more memorable nights here in the city in the sport of boxing. Yeah,
it's hard to, I think for fights of that magnitude to get made there. But I do think that, you looked at the Hopkins fight, and there are other fighters who are kind of East Coast based where Atlantic City can still be a mecca for people to come, and I don't think it's out of the question to have major fights there.
We hope so, and we love going to them. And anything upcoming that you're really looking forward to that maybe the casual boxing fan out there isn't aware of?
Well, we're obviously we're hoping on May 2nd, and everyone knows about it. Tyson Mayweather will come about, but there's a number of good fights on the slate. We actually don't have a fight planned for over a month on Showtime. We haven't set our next fight till it's going to be in March, but there are a number of good fights on the slate. One of the exciting fights coming up, Ruslan Tomatnikov and Lucas Matisse at the end of March. And there's just a number of good matches. One of the misnomers that people have about also Keith Thurman and Robert Guerrero on March 7th out here in Las Vegas, that's the beginning of that NBC series where fans will get to see fights on NBC over the air network. Fights, which are intriguing. I'm going off to Great Britain at the end of February, where boxing has returned to terrestrial TV, over-the-air TV on ITV for Carl Frampton defending his Super Bantamweight Championship. So one of the things that's happening in boxing over the next 8 to 9 months and next year is there will be much more exposure for the average fan to see the sport, and I think that's a very key issue because boxing has, except for last year, boxing has, for the most part in the last 5 or 6 years, put on really excellent matches. The product has been terrific. But because the mainstream media stopped covering the sport and because a lot of the fights are on premium networks, a lot of those fights didn't get as much run as they might have. Now I think that's probably changing.
Al Bernstein, pleasure to catch up with him as one of the more memorable nights in that sport and one of the guys to bring it back to life for us here on 97.3 ESPN. Pleasure to catch up with you, Al.
All right, take care.
Al Bernstein. Loved hearing the stories, the Buster Douglas stuff.